This story is written and narrated to honor the overlooked brilliance of Dr. Percy Lavon Julian, a man who broke through the barriers of race, class, and prejudice to revolutionize modern medicine. Based on true historical events from 20th century America, this story follows the life of a man born just 2 generations after slavery, who would go on to change the course of science, save millions of lives, and prove that genius knows no color. Percy Julian's story is not just about chemistry. It is about courage, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth in a world determined to keep him invisible. The story of Percy Lavon Julian begins in Montgomery, Alabama, in the year 1899, a time when the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of segregation and the unspoken cruelty of limitation. Born to parents who had once been denied the right to read, Percy came into a world that told him from the start what he could never be. But even as a boy, he refused to listen. The son of a railway clerk and a schoolteacher, he found in books what the world refused to give him: freedom. At an age when most children chased marbles in the dirt roads of Montgomery, Percy chased ideas, each word a spark that lit a fire inside him. He devoured every science book he could find, teaching himself about atoms and reactions as if the universe itself whispered secrets only he could hear. But in the Jim Crow South, knowledge was both a weapon and a danger. There were no high schools for black students in Montgomery, and so young Percy's education ended at 8th grade. For most, that would have been the end. For Percy, it was only the beginning. Determined to rise, he took a job as a laborer by day and studied by candlelight at night, his mind sharper than the world allowed. And then came his first miracle, a scholarship to DePaul University in Indiana, a place so far removed from the life he knew that it might as well have been another planet. When he arrived, he discovered that the university had not been expecting a black student. No dorm would house him, no dining hall would serve him. He slept in a fraternity attic and ate leftovers from the campus kitchen. Yet in that isolation, his brilliance burned brighter than ever. Professors marveled at his intellect. Students whispered about the colored genius who solved equations they couldn't understand. Percy graduated first in his class, Phi Beta Kappa, a triumph written in the ink of defiance. But America was not ready for a black scientist. Denied entry into graduate programs at home, he looked across the ocean, to Harvard, to Vienna, where minds were measured not by color but by curiosity. In Vienna, Percy found what he had always sought: acceptance. He walked through cobblestone streets where music and philosophy mixed in the air, and in those grand European laboratories he finally worked without walls. It was there he mastered organic chemistry, studying the molecules of life itself, the tiny invisible architectures that governed the human body. His discoveries caught the attention of the world, but even then, he knew his real test awaited him back home. When Percy returned to America with his PhD, armed with brilliance and degrees, the walls rose again, higher than before. Universities that praised his mind refused to hire him because of his race. Laboratories shut their doors. Even DePaul, where he had once been their brightest star, turned him away. For a time, he taught at historically black colleges, pouring his passion into students who, like him, dreamed of more. But dreams alone could not pay the bills, and soon Percy found himself fighting for survival once again. Then, almost by accident, fate intervened. He was hired by the Glidden Company in Chicago, not in the main building, but in a small lab behind it as a kind of experiment. There, hidden away from the spotlight, Percy Julian began the work that would change medicine forever. Using humble soybeans, ordinary seeds that fed animals, he extracted compounds that mimicked human hormones. From their oils, he synthesized cortisone, progesterone, and testosterone, the foundations of modern pharmaceuticals. Before Julian, cortisone was a luxury available only to the rich, used to treat arthritis and inflammation. After Julian, it became affordable to millions. His methods made possible the mass production of birth control, cancer treatments, and life-saving steroids. Every pill that eased pain, every injection that saved a life, carried his invisible signature. And yet, as his fame grew, so did the hatred around him. When he bought a home in Oak Park, Illinois, a white neighborhood, his house was firebombed. Twice. They burned his property, but not his spirit. The next morning, he walked through the ashes, adjusted his tie, and went back to work. Because for Percy, the greatest revenge was excellence. He would not let their fear define his story. He once said, "I have had but one goal in my life, that through chemistry, I might help humanity." And that is exactly what he did. His lab became a beacon for young scientists of every background. He trained men and women who would go on to lead in medicine, chemistry, and pharmacology. He built bridges where others built walls. And in time, the world began to see what they had tried so hard to ignore. A black scientist whose work had saved more lives than most doctors ever could. In the mid-20th century, Julian's achievements made headlines across the world. He became the first African-American chemist elected to the National Academy of Sciences. Awards and honors began to pour in, but Percy accepted them not with pride, but with humility. He had spent too long in the shadows to seek the spotlight now. To him, every recognition was not a trophy. It was proof that truth, no matter how long it is buried, eventually rises to the surface. And yet, even in his success, he never forgot where he came from. He used his wealth to fund scholarships for young black students, ensuring that others would not have to fight as hard as he did. He gave lectures on equality and education, always reminding audiences that genius could be born anywhere, in the mansions of the rich or the small wooden houses of Alabama. He became a living symbol of possibility, but Percy's story, like all great ones, was not without heartbreak. Despite his breakthroughs, many textbooks omitted his name. When pharmaceutical companies reaped billions from his discoveries, few remembered the man who had made them possible. Even late in life, when he stood at award podiums, some introductions still stumbled over his title, Dr. Julian, as if his achievement defied the language itself. But he smiled, because he knew that history, though slow, was watching. As he grew older, the same curiosity that had driven him as a boy never faded. Even as illness began to touch his body, he continued his research, surrounded by papers, formulas, and vials, his mind alive with possibilities. He once said that chemistry was the poetry of matter, and he lived that truth until his final breath. When he died in 1975, he left behind not just formulas and patents, but a legacy that stretched across generations. A legacy of courage, brilliance, and quiet defiance. Today, every synthetic hormone, every affordable drug, every cure that comes from a laboratory bears traces of Percy Julian's genius. Yet for decades, his story was forgotten, buried under the weight of prejudice and time. But the universe, like chemistry itself, never forgets balance. The elements he once studied still whisper his name, in the glass vials of labs, in the rustle of hospital corridors, in the steady heartbeat of patients whose pain has eased because of him. The climax of Percy Julian's life is not in his fame, but in his fight. The fight to exist as both a scientist and a man in a world that wanted him to be neither. He was proof that the measure of a person is not where they begin, but how fiercely they rise against what holds them down. His story reminds us that history's greatest minds are often those who labor in silence, whose work outlives their names. Percy Julian was more than a chemist. He was a force of nature, a man who distilled hope from despair and turned injustice into innovation. His life was a reaction, one that began with oppression and ended in brilliance. And so, as we look back now, we see not just a forgotten pioneer, but a man who changed the very chemistry of humanity. Percy Lavon Julian, the boy who slept in attics, who worked in shadows, who built empires out of molecules, proved that genius can bloom even in the darkest soil. His name may have been written in small letters by his time, but the world now reads it in light, because heroes like him do not fade, they crystallize. And in every corner of modern medicine, his legacy remains, silent, powerful, eternal,